Welcome back to Boilers in the Stands. I'm your host, Joe Jackson. Alongside me, as always, is my co-host, Kraig Bowers. We are here to preview everything that you need to know. Purdue takes on Houston in the Sweet 16, Lucas Oil in Indy, a matchup that, on paper probably isn't the best for Purdue, but you still got to go play the games. And Purdue has Braden Smith and TKR and plenty of other guys that are playing well around them. So anything can kind of happen in a one game sample size for sure. And we're going to kind of break down, I think, the pathway for Purdue to potentially get a win and try to advance to the Elite Eights. And then once you're there, you just got to win one more. You're at a Final Four. But should be a fun game, I think. I'm very excited for it. We're recording this on a Tuesday evening. I can't lie, I already kind of had butterflies today, just like in anticipation for this game of just like, all right, got it. Just like get me to Friday, like just get me to this game to Lucas Oil. I'm very very excited for it. But Kraig, I'll throw it to you. Just kind of your initial thoughts on the matchup, thoughts on Purdue, just general thoughts, I guess, right now going into this.
I'm just really excited we're here. I'm excited we made it to the Sweet 16. I think most of us in the preview shows in the beginning of the year, we're all like, yeah, if this team makes it back to a Sweet 16, maybe an Elite Eight, anything can happen. And certainly we thought maybe there was Final Four potential there. But like this was kind of the mark of like, we can at least get here and then anything can happen from there. So I'm super excited just to go watch this team play this weekend. Obviously, it's going to be a task, right? Houston comes into this game ranked number 2 in KenPom, number 10 in offense on KenPom, number 1 in defense. They're on a 15-game winning streak. They've beaten 9 KenPom top 25 wins. If any of you guys want to know where I get these facts, it's from Joe's Feed the Post on Substack. I finally figured out the other day, Joe, I was like, I don't have to research all these. Joe's already done it. I can just go get it
I
from
did have it
him.
up.
So shout out to his
Thank you.
Substack, Feed the Post, because you guys can go get all this information yourself. But nonetheless, this is a team, when you look up and down, most teams Purdue has played this year, whether it was Bama or some of these other really high-level teams, even Auburn, you thought, okay, so here's their weak spot. Here's their weak spot. You look up and down the stats for this Houston team, and man, there just isn't much that jumps out at you as a weak spot on this team.
Yeah, I mean, they are one of two teams that are top 10 in both offense and defense per KenPom. Florida's number 11 defensively, so they're right there. But they're just good. They are good, and regardless of whatever we say after this, right? My core belief is Purdue absolutely can win this game. To do that, though, like there is going to be some level if Houston just can't play their A game. If Houston plays their A game, right, Purdue would basically have to play perfect, in my opinion. Not, I mean, that can happen, but right, percentage wise, that's just not likely. However, if Purdue plays very well, and even if Houston plays their B game, like Purdue is very live, I think, to be able to pick off this team and get a win. And I thought, rewatching the Houston Gonzaga game, I think Gonzaga and Purdue are built similarly. Obviously, Gonzaga's at a much higher tempo than what Purdue plays with, and Houston is also a very low tempo team. But in terms of right, elite point guard, elite like 6'9" big, that's awesome on short rolls, a couple shooters, solid like okay defense. Gonzaga's defense is probably a little bit better than Purdue's, but I guess with the way Purdue's defended the past two games, those could even be argued to be pretty similar. All that to say, obviously, Gonzaga still lost, right? Gonzaga did still lose that game. I do think they gave themselves chances. Just they got punched early and couldn't quite overcome it. Purdue can't let that happen. We'll get into all of that, but hey, yeah, like you said, excited to be here and just be able to do this. Excited that we'll get to go to the game and just take in the atmosphere and hopefully Purdue can pull off a win, right? Like I would say, out of every single Sweet 16 game, this is probably the one that once again, like Purdue will have out of all 16 teams, I guess. I assume the public would put the least amount of faith in Purdue winning, and for good reason. But Purdue's also still pretty good, in my opinion. So let's get into everything from unless you have something else you wanted to add on top of it.
No, I mean, I was just going to say, obviously, I'm with you. I still think Purdue can win this game as good as Houston looks. I watched the Houston Gonzaga game back today, as I assume you did yesterday or the day before. And there were things that Gonzaga was doing offensively that I'm like, oh, we can do that. Oh, hey,
Yep.
we can do that. Like these are strong points of Purdue as well. So I'm 100% with you there. and weird things happen in these games, right? We didn't have a whole lot of upsets in the first and second rounds, but it's coming, right? There's always upsets every single tournament. Weird things can happen. I've got faith with it being an Indy that if Purdue gets out to an early lead, that crowd is going to be absolutely insane. This Houston team, like we said, has been on a 15-game winning streak. And even within that streak, there's only been a few games where they've really been tested at the end of those games. So you never know what happens when you put a team like that into that situation that hasn't been through it a lot recently. And there's always just, for me, I'm big on backgrounds and arenas and whatnot. And I always think weird things happen in domes, right? When you go play in domes, background looks different. Everything about you, how you frame it as a shooter looks different. We asked some of the players last year going into Phoenix. Some of them said, no, it doesn't matter. Some others were like, yeah, it matters. So you have to adjust to it and all those sort of things. So there's some things that play here that I think are potentially in Purdue's favor, and certainly think they could have a chance. I guess, Joe, just high level, this is the number one defense in the country. Tell me what makes them the number one defense.
I think the first thing is like they don't have any weak defender, like really across the board. Uzan's maybe their weakest, and he's still a very good defender in my opinion. So they have that, and then they stick with their principles. They are very they blur the line of disciplined and aggressive very well. And then what they do defensively from a schematic standpoint, they are going to high hedge every single ball screen pretty much. They take away the rim. They do a good job of kind of forcing some jumpers, and they force a ton of turnovers that way too. Of like they got dudes that are athletic, they got physical dudes. They can get into the ball, make ball handlers uncomfortable, and then from there, right, they're forcing turnovers, and now they're going to go the other way. They rebound the ball really well. And yeah, just like they're just really cohesive as a unit, and it's hard to do that for their scheme is high hedge, which means you are putting two defenders onto the ball every time. That means on the weak side or past the the initial ball handler, the offense is 4-on-3. It is really hard to be that good of a defense, I think, while giving up that advantage and still being able to trust your guys to rotate, to make the right plays. Now, the size at their guards, I think, do help a little bit too, right? Besides LJ Cryer, like Uzan 6'4", Sharp 6'3", but especially like Sharp, he's just like stocky. And really, besides Uzan and Cryer, I guess Wilson off the bench, like everybody's just like stocky and built and athletic too. So now, right, if Sharp's 6'3", he's fine, like tagging a big on the roll because he's just going to be strong enough to be able to withstand it to a degree. So, I guess to summarize, high hedge everything, force a ton of turnovers, aggressiveness, but are also still like very cohesive and make the right decisions.
Yeah, and I was actually surprised when I pulled up the sheet and started looking through that they weren't taller really at the guard positions than what they were. I just kind of casually watching them a couple of times this year, I felt like those guys are bigger than they are.
Yeah.
And I think it's because they are, like, to your point, I think essentially what you're saying is like they're grown men. Like they are built, grown men out there. Every single one of them up and down that lineup. A side note completely here. Until I got into this team, I had no idea that this team was like as program raised is what it was. Like I just assumed there were way more transfers on this team. Only 3 total, and only one that's in their first year, after transfer. That just surprised me a little bit. So. And go ahead.
No, I had nothing really to
add. So if we flip that, and obviously we know, right, some of the things that bother Purdue offensively, teams that can turn as a defense can turn people over at a high rate. I think they do it a little bit differently. To me, watching them, I feel like they force turnovers because they frustrate teams so much from being able to penetrate, from being able to do what they want to do. They just defend at a really high level versus like being really risky or jumping passing lanes,
like Penn State,
some other team. Yeah. So I think it's a different way in which they do that. And if Purdue can operate their offense efficiently, I think there's a chance maybe they escape without a high turnover game. Also, number 5 in the country in block rate. So when you do get into the paint, there's a chance that they might swat your stuff away anyway. Let's flip offensively to them real quick. I guess another thing that just jumped out right to me that I had no idea about. I've only watched this team during the regular season like once. I had
Yeah.
no idea this was the number one 3-point shooting team in the country at 39.8%. Because you're like, oh, like a really physical defense, a bunch of super athletic built dudes. Like, those aren't shooters. Oh, by the way, they have 3 guards that start that shoot over 40%, and their team shoots 39.8% as a team and is number one in the country in that regard. But outside of that, what do we expect to see from them in terms of what they do well offensively?
Yeah, they're a very high pick and roll rate team. Miles Uzan, their point guard, we'll talk about him more, I'm sure, in a minute when we kind of go through the roster breakdown. He's awesome. Like, just straight up, he's awesome. We'll get into the keys and kind of the personnel matchups and things like that. To me, Uzan's their best player or their most important player, however you want to phrase it. He makes them go. And I've looked a little bit at their on off splits. I'll try to pull it up again right here. But basically, especially in conference play. So filtering out some of the non-con matchups with Uzan off the floor, they have a negative 9.4 net rating. That's obviously not good, but with him on the floor, they are plus 27 net rating. And that's just points per 100 possessions, however much you're up or down. So like he is so critical to them, and he runs a lot of pick and rolls. He's a very good facilitator. He's a very good shooter, can work in the mid range. As you mentioned, right, they are the number one 3-point shooting team. They're about 300th, though, in the country in 3-point attempt rate.
Right.
Really, their 3 guards, Cryer, Uzan, and Sharp, they take a ton of threes. All of them have taken over 125. There's one guy, Terrence Arsenault, who's taken 78. He's an okay shooter. And then there's one guy that's taken 33. Like if you aren't one of those 3 main guards, you aren't shooting threes. Now, on the flip side of that, though, they take a ton of mid-range shots, like a ton. Their bigs, Roberts and Tugler, really good at kind of those floaters and that mid-range area. They have the highest mid-range rate in the entire country. In the half court, 50% of their shots come from the mid-range, right? And that's just so anti a lot of like the I'm just going to say the analytics movement, even though I don't necessarily like using that phrase that way. Like the analytics movement of threes and rims, like Houston's the complete opposite of that, where they're fine taking mid range. Against Gonzaga, I think it was 38 mid range shots, and 27 of them came from their 2 bigs, just kind of on pushes and floaters. So they're good on the roll. They got dudes that can create off the bounce and a couple shooters surrounding. And that's why, like, right, Houston, I think, is stereotyped as this awesome defense, as they obviously are number one in the country. But their offense is it's tough too. And then on top of everything, right, you can play great. And we'll talk about how I think Purdue can try to defend them and force them into these floaters and tough mid ranges. And then they offensive rebound at one of the best rates in the entire country. So, a little bit of a ramble there, but yeah, it was just like, oh man, they are good. Like, there's a reason they're number 1 seed.
Yeah, and in that Gonzaga game, I forget how many second chance points they finished with relative to Gonzaga, but it was a wide margin. And just watching that game, I mean, obviously we'll talk about keys later, but that just jumped off the page to me of like gonna have to rebound well, not because they from 2-point percentage wise they aren't great. Like
No.
they're okay, but they're not great. But they get so many offensive rebounds and putbacks. And I think if you can limit those second chance of points against them, and obviously that's harder to do than just saying it. But if you can, then I think you can start to slow them down offensively some for sure. So let's go ahead and dive in to some of their players, some of their starters. So you already mentioned Milos Uzan, 6'4", 190-pound junior point guard. Originally last year played for Oklahoma, so this is his first year at Houston. Shooting 44% from 3 on 3.5 attempts per game. Kind of runs the show. Talk to me a little bit about the point guard, the head of the snake here.
Yeah, so as I said, I think he's probably their most important player because he just allows he's the one that pushes the engine, right? Or is the engine of the offense. 11.5 points, 4.5 assists, doesn't turn the ball over that much. Primary ball handler, and as I said, he's going to run lots and lots of pick and rolls. He's 6'4", 190, right? It's not like he's like crazy stocky, but and I don't even know if he's like the best athlete in the world, but he's good enough in both of those areas. He's pretty slithery. And so he can kind of just like he does a really good job, I think, of probing and just kind of working that mid-range area. All right, if you're going to step up, we're going to dish it off. If not, I'm just going to kind of get to my spot and connect. Really, really good facilitator out of pick and roll where he's able to find guys. And then, as you mentioned, he's also a good shooter. 44% on catch and shoot threes, 41% on pull up threes. You just kind of have to respect him as a 3 level scorer plus facilitator. Right, like that's just he's just a tough player to guard. My brief preview of how I think Purdue should guard him is make him be a facilitator. Like if he is, it's kind of like the Braden dilemma for teams at times, right? Where if Braden's scoring and facilitating, it's tough to do. But if you can force him to just be one of those things, then like you at least give yourself a chance. And I think it should be the facilitating part. He's also, as I said, a good defender, right? Everybody on this Houston team's a good defender.
Yeah. And my assumption would be if Purdue does what they've done pretty much against everybody else, right? Is regardless of necessarily who you might think the best guard is on the other team, that they want to use CJ to kind of disrupt the initiation of that offense. So is in your head, is this a CJ Cox matchup then?
I think that's what happens. There is part of me though that wouldn't hate Braden on him, but that's only if Purdue is hedges ball screens. And right, TKR especially has been in a lot of drop. My thought there, if they do hedge, is you can throw Braden on him because you know you're just going to bring a second defender and force the ball out of his hands. If they are going to want to play a little bit truer to kind of how they played, then yes, this is absolutely, in my opinion, going to be who CJ is on.
Okay. So then we move to LJ Cryer, 6'1", 200-pound senior guard. Obviously played at Baylor, but he's been at Houston the last 2 years. Comes in averaging 15.6 points per game, 1.9 assists per game, and also shooting 43% from three and 91% from the free throw line on the year. He was voted to the third-team All-American team on all 4 of the major sites. Obviously, number 1 on the scouting report for most teams defensively in terms of how they're going to match up against him. Talk to me about LJ.
Dude's a bucket. He put up 30 points against Gonzaga on 15 shots. Now he did go to the line and go 8 of 8. Dude's a bucket. Like just simply put, I could probably stop the preview there and it's a good enough. It would be good enough in my mind. But no, for real though, he is a really, really good shooter. I mean, he's super high volume, super high percentage. I'm going to pull it up here as this loads. LJ Cryer, 257 attempts from three, 43% on the year. Like he's smaller at 6'1". Still is, I think, pretty strong for his size though. And he's quick, can really work off the bounce, really good, like very comfortable movement shooter. And so whoever it is on him, whether it's Braden or CJ, like you have to be ready to be able to just follow him off ball. And right, again, we're starting to piece together, I guess, my defensive game plan in my head, where it's like you just kind of stick with him and you let the bigs beat you. Because right, I think looking at the Gonzaga Houston game, I think Gonzaga did an awesome job of forcing the bigs to beat them, except for they also let LJ Cryer get loose. And LJ Cryer had 30 points, and I think that's a big reason why Houston did win. Also the rebounding, as you mentioned earlier, but elite shooter, high volume, lots and lots of jumpers. Only 20%, 20 of his 439 shots have been at the rim this season. He's 47% from three on catch and shoot. He's 38% from three on pull-ups. He's dynamic with the ball in his hands. And then he also really likes getting to the step back going left. That's just more of a tendency, I think, type thing, but not too much of a facilitator, solid defender, and a bucket.
Yeah, he's a dude, obviously, and somebody I think too for him, he's one of those guys that once he sees a couple go through, then like the difficulty of shots that he starts hitting from that standpoint just get more, and he's gonna get his. But to me, the more you can disrupt him from getting into that flow where he's got that lock in and is going to hit ridiculous shots, the better chance you have. To finish out kind of the trio of guards, then Emmanuel Sharp, 6'3", 210-pound junior guard, originally committed to Houston. So Houston all the way through. A guy that to me seems to be like a high-level defender, high-level three-point shooter. What are your thoughts on Sharp?
Yeah, like he's kind of your definition 3-and-D guy. I think I would say he's the best defender, or at least best perimeter defender on this team. 6'3", 210 pounds. He's the guy that like he's just stocky. Like he's just built, and he still moves very well for that size. Kind of like I don't know, kind of like, Mason Gillis was just like built, right? He's a
Hmm.
little bit shorter than Gillis, but that kind of type, like just like, oh yeah, he is strong. Really good shooter, 42% from three on the year and 5.5 attempts. Not going to take too many shots from two. Right. He is going to be more of a 3-point shooter. A lot of his shots are going to be catch and shoot, right? He's definitely plays off of Uzan and Cryer being the two more ball dominant guards. Doesn't get to the rim much, going to be more pull ups when he does get to two, but right, it's he's just elite at what he does. He's an awesome defender and an awesome shooter, and it's just like, all right, that's a really, really good player.
Yeah. As we move to kind of their two bigs, and I say bigs, but they're 6'8" forwards, right? Houston doesn't necessarily have a lot of size the way Purdue fans think about size necessarily down low and in the post. In a matchup where TKR is listed at 6'9", Caleb Furst is listed at 6'11". I'll be interested if we see any Berg in this game, just for like short stints like we have, just to like throw some crazy size out there against some of their bigs that are going to try to, come down the lane and hit that little short push shot. But you got Joseph Tugler, 6'8", 230-pound junior forward, averaging 5.6 points per game, almost 6 rebounds per game. 2.5 of those plus are offensive rebounds. And then you've got Juwan Roberts, averaging 30 minutes per game. He's closer to 11 points per game, also right around 6 rebounds per game. Also, both of those guys are really good shot blockers and rim protectors for the size that they have. Did feel like they got challenged at times by some of Gonzaga's bigs in terms of having their offensive skill and what they were able to do against them at times. Talk to me about the two bigs.
Yeah, I'll start with Tugler. A little bit, 10 minutes less per game. I mean, a really good rebounder. And honestly, probably 75% of what I'm going to say applies to both of these bigs of like, so I'll just start there. They're both really, really good rebounders. They are both great shot blockers and rim protector. They both move well defensively, and are just really good on that end. I think the biggest difference is Tugler. He is can be a little bit more on the perimeter, or just I think he's a little bit more versatile defender. But they're both built pretty much the same, 6'8", 230-ish pounds, stocky, just like strong again. Like that's kind of the common theme I think for these Houston players. But getting into Tugler specifically, I think he's moves a little bit better defensively, not as high usage. He's also, I think, a little bit less skilled than Roberts in terms of just a pure like put the ball in the hoop. Tugler is very good around the rim. Outside of the rim, you can really kind of live with his shots, and he's a guy that like he's a guy for in terms of like the floaters and things like that that Houston likes taking. He's the guy you want taking them. Like you're fine with that happening. Roberts, on the other hand, he's really good. He's been really good in those areas. Just looking at his shot chart, he's taken 86 shots at the rim, and he's taking 187 like twos in the paints, not at the rim. So hook shots, floaters, like things like that. He's been pretty good percentage on both. He did tear Gonzaga up with it. I'm going to pull up the box score exactly, but I think he took like 20 shots or something like that. He was 9 of 18, all of them from two. So like he's the guy that they'll go to. They'll let him work from the post, but also just like Tugler, really good rebounder, really good defender, really good shot blocker. They're just again the common theme I think also for Houston is everybody is just very good in their role, and these two guys are very good in their roles.
Yeah. And this is the point in the show where I always say, who do you want to talk about on the bench? So Houston, not a really deep roster in terms of like who's in the rotation, mainly going to go to potentially 8 guys that you might see out there. So not like, like a Michigan State team or a few other teams we've seen where they're going to have kind of platoon guys in and out throughout the game. So I'll just kind of give you the floor on the 3 bench guys.
Yeah, we'll start with Mike Wilson. Sorry, 6'3", 175-pound guard. He is a wiry kind of athlete that is very disruptive defensively. Like if Emmanuel Sharp's the best perimeter defender, Wilson might be their second best in terms of just really quick hands, can really get into guys and just create havoc that way. Also a good rebounder at his size, averaging 4 rebounds in only 17 minutes a game at 6'3" is very impressive. Not a super efficient offensive player. He'll kind of run the show a bit if Uzan's out of running some pick and rolls, things like that. He wants to get downhill more, get to the mid range, get to the rim a lot more than taking threes. He's a guy like he can knock down an open three, but he would much rather just try to get to the rim. And he really wants to drive left. Like he wants to go left when he drives, and he's very good with that hand. Number 5, Javier Francis, 6'8", 235-pound senior forward, 15 and a half minutes per game. Not you know, as high of a usage as Roberts and Tugler, but is their main backup. All three of these guys are like 6'8", 235 pounds, and they kind of like he's going to fit in the mold. He's a very good rebounder. He attacks the glass very, very hard. Um, he isn't super effective outside of the rim. Like he's not somebody that's going to be taking a ton of floaters and things like that. He is actually has not made a single shot outside the paint the entire season, but good rim protector, physical, strong, even though he's only 6'8". And then last guy, Terrence Arsenault, 6'6", 205-pound wing, versatile defender in terms of like he's a perimeter guy, but can still kind of help protect the rim a bit. 33% from three on the year, like right. I think you live with him taking a three over like Cryer taking a three, but you also, if can help it, don't want to leave him wide open. He can handle the ball and kind of help that sense in a pinch. Good finisher at the rim, right? And these guys understand their role. Like they're there to spell some minutes for the starters, play good defense, and then whether it be attack the glass or just defend hard. Like they understand that's their job.
Yeah. So an impressive group of 8, and in terms of what they do defensively, regardless of who's out there, you never feel like there's a drop off
Yeah.
with any of the bench guys that are coming in. I think that's something I noticed. Just they have that sustained defensive effort, that sustained effort on the offensive glass as well, seemingly throughout the entire game, regardless of who's on the floor. If we're looking at how Purdue matches up and maybe how they try to attack this team defensively, what they do defensively against them, this, like you mentioned, this team plays at a slower pace. They don't put up a ton of points. They average 74 and a half points per game, which is good for like 154th in the country, but they're number 1 in the country in limiting points, forcing teams to only score 58 points per game. To me, this is a game where Purdue's got to find a way to get into the 70s if they're going to have a chance to win it. And I think, obviously, I think there are some areas where they can attack them. But before we get into that and I ask you those questions, this team is really physical, and they're going to be extremely physical in their defense. They will foul some, right? They're like 239th, 240th in the country, something like that in terms of fouls. I really do think a big key in this game is just going to be, kind of early on figuring out how are they going to call this game. And if the officials are calling it tight, and we've watched back-to-back games, right, during March Madness, and you watch one game and it's like, oh my God, they're letting them get away with everything. And then the next game, every single thing's getting whistled. So there's not a ton of consistency across the board. If this is a game where they're calling things tight, I think TKR has the opportunity to work in that space where he's attacking in that short roll, where he's getting his floater, but also if he goes and tries to really force the issue a little bit with them, to draw some fouls. And if we can get their bigs in foul trouble, then I think maybe some things potentially change a little bit.
Yeah, I think that is 100% for sure. Like if Purdue can get them in foul trouble and force them to be into different rotations that they don't necessarily love, like it's not like they have some crazy dominant 7-footer or anything. They don't have a 7-footer, or at least in rotation. I don't know if they have someone stashed on the bench. But yeah, like they're not a crazy deep team. Fouls are just going to happen when you're that aggressive. It just, right. It's something I think Sampson's going to live with, their coach. But yeah, I think that is a very good call out. And I kind of, as we talk about, we'll stick with Purdue's offense attacking this Houston defense. Like first things first, like very first thing, handle the ball. Like if Purdue has a game where they have 18 turnovers or something like that, it's over. Like you're just not going to win. Beyond that, though, right? If Braden and TKR specifically can kind of handle the ball, Houston puts 2, like as I've said, they high hedge. So that means they are putting 2 onto the ball. Gonzaga was awesome at hitting their short roller. Their short roller was Graham Ike. Honestly, a similar style game to TKR. And like, right, Houston's base, what they do basically every time, 2 on the ball, high hedge, So what that means is if you can get that pass to TKR on the roll, you're 4-on-3 from there. And those push shots should be open. Some kickouts can happen, or TKR can just kind of put his head down and get to the rim. And so that's where I think like Braden's initial pass is probably the most important thing for this offense. And then from there, it's TKR being under control and making the right decision, because depending on how the game goes, Houston will have to probably switch a little bit, like against Gonzaga. And I keep referencing it because I think, at least in the half court offense, like they run a lot of similar stuff to Purdue in terms of just pick and roll, spam it, short roll. Houston, when they tag, so tagging the roller means your weak side guy, whoever's defending the weak side, he comes over and kind of, essentially tags the roll, right? And stays in front to make it a little bit harder pass or not allow the roller to get a super easy look. They often don't like that. They'll let that short roll happen. They usually tag a little bit lower. Gonzaga was so good at it that there was times that they basically had to tag at 17 feet. Now, if you're doing that with your weak side guy, that's when the skip pass opens. And so that's where Lawyer, CJ, Colvin, Jakari, like they got to be able to knock down shots too, if that happens. But it starts with, to me, everything starts with success in the short roll with Braden and TKR. If that happens, then I think you can start moving this defense and start getting them a little bit uncomfortable. Again, I keep referencing the Gonzaga game. Towards the end of the game, Houston started switching. They don't do that normally. Like they are very firm in their 2 on the ball, pressure, trap. They had to start switching because Gonzaga was getting so many good looks out of that short roll. So like if that can happen, I think you can start forcing Houston to have to do a little bit different things. And if you're doing that, that's giving you a chance, because that means, right, you're doing something so correctly that Houston's like, all right, we got to change. And I think it's going to be a lot of pick and roll. And now if they do go in the post, Houston, from what I've seen for the most part, they're going to double generally from the low side, kind of similar to Purdue, maybe not as exaggerated as what Purdue does defensively if shading baseline. But if that's happening, then that goes back to, all right, TKR, you got to make the right decision. Like if you can get to the rim, great. If not, CJ, Lawyer, Jakari, Smith, Colvin, knock down those kick out threes. Don't be hesitant, knock them down. So, right, we know this is what game is this, 35 of the year, something like that. We know that Purdue's offense is going to be a lot of pick and rolls and it's going to be a lot of post-ups. Game 36. How Houston defends those is going to be to try to get the ball out of the main person's hands. So if TKR can score the short roll and if guys can knock down kickouts, like I think those two things give Purdue a chance to stay in this game.
Yeah, and I'm always happy when I watch a game, Joe, and I think something in my head, and then I come on and I hear you say it, because it always makes me feel good about myself. But you know that meme where it's like the guy's like pointing like, whoa,
Yeah.
wait.
Yeah.
Like multiple times when they hit him in the short roll in that Gonzaga game and then skip pass, wide open 3-point shooter, I was just like, we can do that.
Yeah.
Like if we can get that first pass to TKR in that short roll, and then TKR makes good decisions and you start popping the ball once those guys are out of rotation, like I'm excited about that opportunity, that possibility. Obviously have to do it, but I think that opportunity could be there for this Purdue team.
If they take care of the ball, and that initial pressure, then things can open up. It's just you gotta handle that initial pressure, which we've seen Purdue do great at sometimes. We've also seen Purdue basically get blown out of games because it was just like, all right, they're not handling the pressure today. So
100%. On the opposite end of this, where do you see Purdue's defense having potential struggles against this team? Or where do you think Houston's going to try to exploit Purdue? How can Purdue maybe match up and handle that in terms of the scheme that they're going to provide?
Yeah, this is where I'm very curious to see what Painter does. Based on what Purdue has done this season, I expect them to kind of do their normal thing. And right, Purdue at their core want to force jumpers, and Houston has no issue taking floaters and pull-up jumpers. As I've said, in the half court, lowest rim rate, so that means lowest amount of shots coming at the rim out of anybody in the entire country, Houston, and they take the most mid-range shots. Now they're just very good at it, and as we've said, right, their dudes are going to take the shots that they know they can make. I'm very curious to see what they do. And so based on what Purdue has done, right, with when you have first in, you're switching everything 1 through 4, and then TKR, when he's defending a ball screen, he'll be in drop coverage, right? And so that's where you're kind of dropped back below the screen. I could see that happening and just switching and staying in front. And they do the same when Heidi's in at the 4. Um, and when TKR's in drop, you're just really trying to force mid range shots, which Houston is very capable, willing to do, but they're also very good at. There's also part of me that thinks like, all right, kind of just high hedge the ball and right, not necessarily to try to force turnovers, although they could, but do it to because if you do that and you stick on Cryer, don't provide a ton of help off of him, you are now making essentially the bigs try to beat you. And in my mind, I think that's the best way to go. Of all right, get the ball out of Uzan's hands, make Roberts and Tugler shoot a trillion floaters, and if they make them, you're probably going to just lose anyways. So that's a mix between what I think happens and what I think could work. Obviously, the drop coverage and things like that can also work. I don't know if we said this on air or off air, and when we were talking, Kraig, and this was your points, but like you're also just you said like, hey, sometimes they just can miss those shots, right? Like those, if you are a jumper heavy team, you're gonna have random stretches where they just don't go, and so there is that part as well. But going back to right, Purdue's looked better defensively over the past 2 games. A lot of it is staying in front. If CJ is on Uzan, if he can kind of navigate screens and stay in front a little bit better and make Houston work just a little bit harder, that's also a big key. And then on top of everything, probably the most important thing, and I saved it for last, I guess, defensive rebounding. You
Yeah.
cannot work for 25 seconds because this Houston team they have a slower tempo than Purdue. Um, you cannot work for 25 seconds, force Tugler to shoot a 12-footer, and then allow Roberts to get a putback or Tugler or whoever, right? Sharp, he'll crash too. Like you cannot, if that happens, I really do think, especially with if this is a closer game, those putbacks are going to feel momentum wise like 4 or 6 points.
100%. And we can see just in games that we've played recently when we were dominating the offensive glass, just kind of how much it sucks the soul out of a team after they feel like they played a really good defensive possession, and then it doesn't matter because you end up scoring on second chance points. You've kind of rattled off multiple keys to the game as we were going through that, but I think obviously some of those keys is got to be able to defensive rebound, not allow them to have offensive rebounds. I think it's also going to be a key for us on the other end. We do have a little bit more size. They rebound really well, but down low, especially when Caleb and TK are out there, have just a little bit more size. Our ability to potentially offensive rebound and get some second chance points, not turn the ball over, right? Just handle the ball, take care of the ball. Open shooters got to knock down threes when TKR makes that read and hits them because you're only going to get so many open looks against this team. I would say another key for me in this game, you're in Indianapolis. You got like a gift from heaven in this game. Houston is thousands of miles away from here. You are in Indianapolis. You are 67, 68 miles away from Lafayette, from where you're going to be playing. The house is going to be packed with Purdue fans. I really think a major key in this game is going to be to get out to a quick start. Just if Purdue can build a little lead, 5-6 points, right? In that first 5 to 7, 8 minute stretch, can manage to do that, and you get that entire crowd behind you, things start to happen. And those high seeds, those number 1 seeds, we've seen it. We've been on the other end of this. They start to get a little tight, right? So I think a key, if you're going to beat a team that, as we just look at the analytics, right, are better at a lot of things than this Purdue team has been throughout the year, if you can get out to a quick start and you can get the crowd behind you and kind of ride that momentum, I think that's going to do volumes for this team's chances. And the last thing, and then I'll turn it over to you. Anytime you play a team that's really physical, I think it's just really important in my mind to be able to withstand that initial punch of that physicality. Now, I think this Purdue team's built to do it. I don't know that anybody they've played is as physical as Houston, but like they've played a really physical Ole Miss team. They've played a really physical Marquette team at that point in time during the year. They've played some really physical defenses in the non-conference and then a couple in Big Ten play. So I don't think they're going to be shocked by how physical Houston is. Being able to withstand that, and to me, also being aggressive against that physicality, put the onus on the refs some, right? I'm always big on like, man, if they're going to be up in your grill that much, put the onus on the refs, create some contact, see if you can get some foul calls going. Because if you do, and you can get them in a little bit of foul trouble, you can start going the line. Hey, it's a lot easier to score from 15 feet when nobody's got a hand in your face from the foul line than it is trying to go against those guys that are super physical, athletic defenses.
Yeah, I think those are all really good points too, because they're kind of in the same vein I was going to bring up of like, right. I'll get back to the on-court stuff, but there is just some level of just like don't be afraid of the moment, right? Purdue
Yeah.
at this point, especially given Houston's going to be the favorites and all of that, and I know, well, I don't know how much Purdue cares about noise or not, or how much they notice, but everybody's going to be on Houston. You see it on Twitter already, right? Like everybody's on Houston. Purdue is like I've seen multiple people say Purdue is the one team that has no chance to make the Final Four. You're playing with house money. Like go out and just kind of all right. We're gonna play free, and as you said, now if you can get out to that early lead, because that is something Gonzaga did not do, and I think a big reason why they lost is Gonzaga got punched early and quickly, and kind of took them a while to recover. Purdue is going to be, if they can do the opposite, as you said, all right, now we're going to kind of get going and start having some success. That can kind of build from there. And then getting back into the encore, it's going to be basically just a summary of the episode. And I guess I'll do them in order for what I think. One, do not turn the ball over. Like limit turnovers. I don't know. Under this can be should be a lower possession game. So like probably under like 11 is the goal. Under 10. If Purdue is going to be able to win. So limit turnovers, crash the defensive glass, and then TKR and Braden just need to be great. Like,
Yeah.
right.
Your studs have to be
so that's
studs.
third, and then fourth is the role players not be scared, right?
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully you get the production. Shots are going to go in or they aren't, but just don't be scared and just keep playing.
Yeah, and obviously it's another step up, right? But I think we saw so far in those first two games, there was definitely in the first half against High Point, you could tell there were some jitters and those guys who hadn't been in that moment, and even from some of the other role players who had been in some of those moments. I did not feel that the second half. I did not feel that next game against McNeese whatsoever. So you hope they carry that confidence over, certainly. I think there's something to be said, too, of like, if you're Purdue, most people haven't given you a chance past this point. And most people were saying, now they'll tell you they don't listen to press, but then they reference it sometimes, or pay attention to social media, but then they reference it sometimes. So I'm sure they've seen like prognosticators say they weren't going to get this far, or this is as far as they can make it. So to some degree, there's a little bit of playing with house money, right? Yeah. Like, hey, nobody expects us to win this game. Just go out and ball out, and whatever happens, happens. And like I said, you get towards the end of that game, you get that last 5 minutes. If you're ahead or that game's really close, we've seen it 1,000 times. That pressure can flip to the number one seed.
Is this the first game, since December of Braden Fletch and Braden Fletch's freshman year, TKR's redshirt freshman year? Is this the first game since like December after PK85 where like, at least from my perspective, Purdue like doesn't have pressure on them? Like, I'm just kind of like you saying that just kind of made me think, and it's like, all right, every single game last year was so highly scrutinized, and even their freshman year, like once they got to number one, or I don't know if they got to number one or just was really good after PK85, and then Edie was looking good. It was like, oh, every single game is highly scrutinized, and then you're kind of already built into it this year of like, how good is everybody without Edie, and how good can Purdue actually be? Like, is this the first game in basically what would that be, 2 years that in theory they shouldn't have that much pressure on them?
In theory. Now, if we talk to them, they might say like, no, like we still fully expect to win. So we have we still, have pressure on us. But in terms of like public pressure, like nobody expects it, right?
Yeah.
Now, with that said, you said everybody was picking against them. I did see somebody earlier today, so I had to pull it up real quick. Nicole Auerbach and whoever her co-host is, I did see they put something out on NBC Sports that Michigan State and Purdue had the best chance to make the Final Four out of the 4 teams remaining. So there are some people believe it.
Oh,
they got a little bit of hope, Joe. So not everybody. Joe, I have some breaking news for Boilers in the Stands fans. We will be hosting a pregame party similar to pregame parties that we hosted out in Phoenix before the Final Four. I know many of the listeners that tune in attended those. It is going to be held at, I've just totally lost the name of this. It's going to be held at the Saint Shack from 4:30 and will last till 10 p.m. You can leave whenever you want. You can come whenever you want. We want to have an early enough start time for those of you guys that were going to attend both games and wanted to be there the whole time, that you could come and hang out before that. And also late enough for those of you who have no intention of going to the first game and just really want to go to the Purdue game, that you guys can keep hanging out. Joe and Greg and I will be there early on. I think Greg and I are going to hang out a little bit later. I'm not a big get in the stadium super early for games that aren't Purdue games. Joe is that guy, is a total basketball junkie. So Joe will probably be heading out earlier than Greg and I, but all of us will be there, especially early on. There is a small cover charge to get in. We're going to be putting a tweet out later on through the Boilers in the Stands Twitter. We'll be putting it out through our personal sites and also on Boiler Diehards on Facebook as well. That's going to have a QR code. It is, I believe, directly, almost diagonally across from the official Purdue bar for alumni down there as well. So it's right there around Brothers, only like a 8-minute walk to Lucas Oil. We will have more information for you coming soon. Join us, come down. We don't know how many of these we're getting left. Come down, have a good time as we head into the Sweet 16 matchup against Houston.
Yeah, I mean, and there's going to be plenty of time to kill before the game starts. That's for sure. It's listed as a 10:09 Eastern time start. Probably going to be closer to like 10:25, 10:30. Going to be a late one, but I did see, I think it was Cobra stats, and I forget the exact stats, but basically Braden has said he's a night owl, and like games tipping off after 8 p.m. or something, he's just like much better at. So you have that going for him too, I guess, in terms of the late game. But yeah, definitely come hang out with us for a bit, or them for a while, me for a bit, and should be a good time. We had a good time last year before the Final Four and before the national championship game. Crazy that is 1 year ago already. But do you have anything else? Houston Purdue preview, Sweet 16, NCAA tournament.
I do not. We might have set a record for the longest preview that we've done recorded.
Well, hopefully we got another one coming up after this. So, but felt like this was one of the more prepared games I've been for. Like I said it off the hop. Like I should not be feeling as like excited and anticipate and as much anticipation as I am for this game already, but I am, and I'm just can't wait for it to get here. So we do appreciate everybody tuning in. If this is the last preview, appreciate everybody tuning in throughout the season. If you have not already and you're here at this point in the show still, please consider liking and subscribing. Just helps us out a lot. We will have a live post-game show sometime after the final buzzer. It'll be a late one, but it'll be there. If win or lose, you can come in, vent, or celebrate, or whatever it is. Obviously, you can go back and rewatch it too, since it is such a late one. But appreciate everybody tuning in. We'll be live after the show sometime. And yeah, maybe we'll see you before the game, if not after the game, in the post-game show.